Look closely at the structures that span our rivers, cut through our mountains, and define the shape of our modern cities. They tell you stories of Roman legions, of medieval engineers, of 19th century industrial ambition. They tell you that these monuments, these veins of civilization, were built by men with rudimentary tools, using simple compression physics, driven by human labor and basic mathematics. They tell you these structures are strong because they were built slowly, stone by stone. But what if they are lying to you? What if the official history of engineering is not just incomplete, but deliberately fabricated? Look again, this time at the bridges and aqueducts that defy physics, that mock the very definition of erosion and material fatigue. We are talking about colossal stone spans, often miles long, sometimes hundreds of feet high, structures that have stood for centuries, sometimes millennia, against forces that routinely dismantle the best of our modern steel-reinforced efforts. They should have collapsed. They should have buckled under the weight of tectonic shift, the relentless assault of floodwaters, the sheer, crushing fatigue of gravity. But they didn't. We are told that the engineers of the so-called classical and industrial eras were masters of simple stone masonry. Yet their surviving infrastructure possesses a resilience, an integrated intelligence that we struggle to replicate even with advanced computer modeling and synthetic materials. This is the paradox that breaks the official narrative. Why is the primitive work stronger than the advanced work? This is not just about a few old ruins. This is about a global pattern of impossible structural survival. We are uncovering the skeletal remains of a civilization far beyond anything we are allowed to acknowledge. The civilization of Tartaria. Think about the scale of the paradox. We have official historical records detailing the arduous, often failed attempts of 19th century construction. Bridge collapses were frequent, materials were unreliable, and infrastructure needed constant, costly repair. Yet, simultaneously, we are expected to believe that massive stone viaducts, crossing impossibly treacherous terrain, engineered with precision stone cutting and gigantic monolithic supports, were constructed cheaply, quickly, and flawlessly by local populations using horses, winches, and black powder. Does this make any sense? Consider the aqueducts often attributed to the Roman Empire, or the massive railway viaducts scattered across Britain and the American West, built supposedly in a brief span of industrialization. These are not merely functional structures. They are architectural feats of hyper-precision. Look at the stonework, enormous blocks, perfectly keyed and fitted, demonstrating an understanding of stress distribution and material composite behavior that surpasses the known science of their supposed construction period. We talk about the sophistication of modern bridges that account for expansion, contraction, and harmonic vibration. Yet these so-called ancient structures, built without our chemical binders or tensile steel, handle these exact same forces with silent, stubborn contempt. They stand immovable. The official story tells us that these stone giants are monuments to human perseverance. The truth is far more unsettling. These structures are monuments built by an intelligence we have forgotten, and we are merely the occupants, the temporary caretakers, patching holes in a system we did not design. We live among the ruins of giants. We are the inheritors who wandered into a massive, functioning house after the original occupants vanished. We look at the HVAC system and call it decorative molding. We see oversized infrastructure and assume it was just clumsy engineering. We mistake the ruins of their technological sophistication for primitive attempts at grandeur. The Tartarian infrastructure, especially the bridges and colossal earthenworks, are the most undeniable proof of this forgotten world. Look closely at the foundations of these spans. In countless examples across Europe, Asia, and North America, you will find the base supports, the buttresses, buried deep beneath the current ground level. These are not slight sinkages. These are often entire structural levels entombed beneath layers of hard-packed earth and mud, sometimes 6, 10, even 15 feet deep. The stone arches, designed to soar over ancient riverbeds or valleys, now barely clear the modern water level. Why would any engineer build a bridge foundation that requires digging massive, precise trenches, only to immediately fill those trenches back up, or worse, start building the bridge's arch system below the expected terrain level? It's illogical. Unless, of course, the ground level rose dramatically after the bridge was built. Consider the monolithic stone piers. Often these stones are so massive, so incredibly heavy, that their official placement defies the capabilities of 19th century lifting technology. Even if we grant them steam-powered cranes, a generous allowance, the sheer volume of material placement across difficult remote terrain suggests a systematic, large-scale automated capacity far beyond oxen and ropes. Observe the perfect enormous arches of the Pont du Gard, or the colossal scale of the railway viaducts in Scotland, sometimes stacked 3 tiers high. The stonework is not random. It utilizes principles of geopolymer concrete, a self-healing, incredibly durable cement paste mixed with specialized aggregate technology far beyond the simple lime mortar they claim was used. The bridges didn't just survive, they were designed to endure environmental Armageddon. Why would anyone design bridge systems capable of handling traffic volumes that didn't exist until the late 20th century, using materials that resist degradation for millennia, with foundations buried beneath ancient mud, unless the official story about the builders and the environment is profoundly, terrifyingly wrong? This pattern is not regional. It is a global signature. From the massive, geometrically perfect walls and roads of the Incas, connecting mountainous terrain with impossible precision, to the sprawling, monolithic canal systems of Southeast Asia and the colossal, redundant railway infrastructure of the former Russian Empire, they all share the same technological fingerprint: oversized, over-engineered, and inexplicably durable. This global uniformity of advanced, stone-based megalithic engineering points to a single interconnected civilization, the vast network of Tartaria. A unified global culture that managed the planet, not with crude steam and coal, but with a mastery of material science and geological stability we have only begun to dream of. If this global network was so advanced, why did it disappear? Why are we the ones scrambling among the ruins? The answer lies in the very resilience of the bridges themselves. They are survivors of a cataclysm, a civilization-level reset. The colossal scale of the Tartarian bridges, often far exceeding functional necessity, suggests they were designed for extreme conditions. They were built to survive the very event that wiped out their creators. We are talking about the global mud flood, not a localized event, but a rapid geological deposition of fine silt and clay that simultaneously buried the lower levels of every major city worldwide and devastated the global population. Look at the empty cities captured in early photographs of the American West and Russia. Massive, ornate stone structures standing desolate, waiting for the new occupants arriving via the orphan trains. Where did the original builders go? They were either annihilated by the catastrophe that the bridges survived, or they were so few in number that the memory of their science was completely lost to the desperate survivors, our supposed ancestors. The bridges remained, silent witnesses to the sudden end of a technologically superior age. What exactly made these Tartarian bridges so indestructible? It wasn't just the size, it was the forgotten technology integrated into the very structure. We are told they relied purely on compression. We are lied to. These structures were likely harmonic stabilizers, resonant systems designed to interact with the natural energy fields of the Earth. Imagine the massive stone piers acting as tuning forks, designed with specific geometries to dampen seismic vibrations or even to manage atmospheric electricity. The bridges weren't just transport conduits. They might have been part of a massive wireless power network, drawing energy from the atmosphere and conducting it across the globe. Look closely at the details often called decorative or Moorish architecture, the spirals, the elaborate carvings, the brass or copper elements embedded in the stone. These could be the remains of ancient atmospheric energy collection devices, similar to what Nikola Tesla later attempted to replicate. The very structure of the bridge maintained a resonant frequency that gave it structural immunity, turning the relentless forces of nature into manageable energy flows. Our ancestors, the confused survivors of the reset, found these functional massive structures. They didn't understand the resonant geometry, the geopolymer composition, or the integrated energy systems. They saw only stone, and so they attributed the structure's impossible strength to brute force and simple mathematics. They began to use them, adapting them for crude railway systems and horse carts, treating the atmospheric conduits as mere ornamentation. And then history needed to be rewritten. To maintain control over the new, fragmented populations, the knowledge of the advanced preceding civilization had to be purged. We see evidence of this systematic destruction everywhere. The great fires that conveniently burned down city records right after the supposed mudflood reset. The destruction of ancient libraries attributed to accidents or barbarians. And the massive world fairs of the 19th and early 20th centuries, often staged directly atop the reclaimed monumental ruins of Tartarian cities, serving as both camouflage and temporary historical replacement. The very notion that a global civilization with superior technology existed was intentionally erased, its greatest works downgraded to Roman aqueducts or Industrial Revolution triumphs. They couldn't tear down the bridges. They were too massive, too essential for the continuity of the surviving populations, so they simply rewrote the history of their construction. They stole the intellectual property of a vanquished empire. The result is the reality we inhabit today, a world built on profound deception. We live among the silent ruins of a civilization far greater than our own, surrounded by technology we barely understand, attributing impossible achievements to men in top hats wielding shovels. We are not the apex of development. We are not the builders. We are the inheritors who forgot the language of the creators. And the forgotten Tartarian bridges stand as the most terrifying evidence that the catastrophe was real. The technological sophistication was immense, and the official history is nothing but a carefully constructed lie. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the specific structural mechanisms that ensure these bridges simply cannot collapse, the physics of anti-collapse technology that our modern engineers have yet to decode. We will examine the forces they survived, and why their continued existence proves the fundamental instability of our accepted timeline. The official narrative demands we accept a staggering contradiction. They point to the great stone bridges spanning continents, the impossibly wide viaducts threading through mountain ranges, structures so robust they laugh in the face of 200 years of neglect and seismic activity. And they tell us that these monolithic achievements were the result of steam power, horse carts, and men with hammers. Stop and truly visualize this. We are asked to believe that 19th century logistical capabilities, the same logistics that struggled to transport fresh milk across a state line, were somehow sufficient to quarry, lift, and perfectly set cyclopean granite blocks weighing hundreds of tons, miles away from any existing infrastructure, often over raging rivers or sheer ravines. It is a technological paradox that demands immediate dismissal. Look closely at the precision. These are not rough-hewn, stacked stones. These are examples of perfect cyclopean masonry, where blocks fit together with tolerances measured in millimeters, creating keystones and arch supports that distribute gravitational load with an almost impossible efficiency. This level of precision requires advanced computerized cutting tools, materials science that understands crystalline lattice structures, and an energy source capable of generating the immense power necessary to move mountains of material. Does this make any sense? Does the history book description of bearded men in overalls pulling ropes make any logical sense when contrasted with infrastructure that requires fusion energy or directed vibration technology to construct today? The answer is a deafening, resounding, absolute no. The simple truth is that the history we have been fed is a children's tale designed to mask a far more complex and shocking reality. The bridges didn't collapse because they weren't designed with our limited understanding of gravity and stress in mind. They were built by a civilization that operated under a completely different paradigm of physics and energy. We need to shift our perspective entirely. Stop seeing the 19th century as the pinnacle of industrial achievement and start seeing it for what it truly was, a time of scavenging. Maybe they didn't build these bridges, these majestic dams, or these towering aqueducts. Maybe someone before them did. The people documented in the history books were not the creators. They were merely the terrified, bewildered occupants. They were primitive tribes, struggling to re-establish rudimentary survival methods, living in the ruins of a highly advanced, annihilated global civilization, a civilization we call Tartaria. Imagine a nomadic band of survivors squatting in the penthouse suite of a functional skyscraper, using antique maps as insulation and lighting fires on the marble floor, because they have no idea how the heating or electrical grid works. That is the true image of the post-cataclysmic world we are told was the Industrial Revolution. They simply repurposed the existing robust infrastructure they inherited. They put small, inefficient steam engines on bridges that were designed to handle maglev transport and atmospheric energy conveyance. They are the tenants, not the architects. And once you accept this core concept, that we are inheritors, not builders, the rest of the historical anomalies snap into terrifying clarity. The visual proofs of this forgotten collapse are not confined to the impossible bridges. They are under your feet right now. They are visible in every major city on Earth, a horrifying, synchronized footprint of a disaster that silenced a global empire. Look at the architecture. Why are there so many buildings in every historic district? From St. Petersburg to Philadelphia, from Sydney to Buenos Aires, where the basement windows are clearly half buried? These are not basements. These were the ground floors, entombed by a cataclysmic deposition of earth. Examine the oversized monumental doors found on public buildings and old European banks. Doors that stand 15 or 20 feet high. Doors requiring immense force or specialized mechanisms to open. Why would turn-of-the-century architects, obsessed with efficiency and economy, design doors so ridiculously large and heavy for human beings of our stature? The answer is twofold. Either the builders were significantly larger than us, or these entryways were designed for mechanized transport, vehicles, or even atmospheric energy harvesting devices that we now mistake for aesthetic flourishes. Look closer at the architectural details we dismiss as mere decoration. Those ornate, gigantic columns that suddenly stop below street level, only to continue down into the sub-basement. Why are the ceilings in these so-called basements often vaulted, grand, and meticulously finished? A waste of material if they were only intended for storage. They weren't storage, they were living spaces, grand halls, now buried under meters of dense, solidified mud. Even the elaborate staircases in these buildings are a visual paradox, with risers so high that they are clearly impractical for comfortable human ascent. Could they be designed for a species with different biomechanics? Or did they incorporate some anti-gravity, electromagnetic lift technology that the inheritors subsequently stripped out or simply couldn't operate? And consider the sheer number of subterranean tunnels and complex waterworks found beneath these cities, often constructed of solid brick and perfectly engineered, systems far too elaborate and robust for the documented population size of the 1850s. Ventilation shafts, disguised as intricate stone carvings, heating systems using unknown thermal transfer methods, and complex piping networks that function without the primitive pumps that were supposedly the height of their technology. Why would anyone design this level of monumental infrastructure only to immediately bury the first floor, unless the official story is completely and criminally wrong? This isn't an isolated phenomenon. This is a global pattern. The same buried architecture, the same oversized doors, the same impossible foundation work is found across continents separated by oceans. This level of standardization and simultaneous burial screams of a unified, singular event. It cannot be coincidence that the entire northern hemisphere and significant portions of the southern exhibit identical architectural wounds, the first floor consumed by earth. The standardized grid layouts of seemingly unconnected cities, the omnipresent star forts, geometric defensive structures found globally, built to resist attacks we are never told about. All these factors point to a single monolithic civilization. Tartaria was not just an empire, it was a global, interconnected technological network. The catastrophe that followed was equally global, not a localized flood or a slow process of decay. This was a synchronized, devastating blow that wiped the slate clean. We are talking about the Great Catastrophe, the mud flood, an event systematically erased from our timeline. Imagine a sudden, massive influx of fine, sterile, mineralized earth, possibly liquefied, possibly carried by atmospheric currents or hypertsunamis, triggered by an energetic weapon or a planetary shift. This material rained down or swept across the globe, suffocating the lower floors of every major metropolitan area simultaneously. It was a population replacement, a sudden demographic vacuum. Look at early photographs from the mid-19th century, the famous pictures of Washington, D.C., Paris, or London. They are desolate. Massive, majestic buildings stand empty, and the streets are eerily devoid of people. Where were the millions of laborers supposedly required to build this infrastructure? Where was the thriving population? They are absent. They vanished. The sparse figures visible often look ragged, out of place, like squatters nervously occupying a ghost city. This leads to the chilling mystery of the orphan trains in America, and similar mass displacement phenomena worldwide. A massive, organized effort to repopulate these empty, inherited cities with a new, malleable generation, severed from any memory of the world that was just destroyed. The mudflood wasn't just geological. It was the ultimate historical reset, designed to mandate amnesia. The key to the forgotten bridges and the buried cities lies in advanced lost technology. The structures didn't require massive amounts of concrete and steel in the way we use them today, because they utilized resonance structures and atmospheric free energy. Imagine a bridge where the immense gravitational forces are partially negated by harnessing ambient electromagnetic energy, where the structure itself acts as a receiver and distributor of atmospheric current. The massive granite blocks were not just heavy supports. They were integral components in a unified energy grid, their crystalline structure potentially amplifying or directing energy flow. This is why the spans are impossible. They were structurally lightened by technology. We see echoes of this technology everywhere. Those domes and spires on the old buildings, they weren't just religious symbols. They were atmospheric electricity collectors, receivers for the global energy grid that Tartaria operated. The water systems that run without modern pumps, they used resonant frequency or complex pressure dynamics based on the shape of the pipes and the materials used, something the new occupants simply couldn't understand. When the survivors moved in, they didn't know how to run the original systems. They either capped them, let them decay, or ripped out the sophisticated internal components, replacing them with crude, inefficient steam-powered versions. They reduced a massive, highly efficient free energy global utility network into localized, primitive utilities. They were literally heating water with coal in buildings that once drew limitless, clean power directly from the atmosphere. And to ensure that this humiliating truth, the truth that they were the primitive inheritors of a golden age, never reached the new population, evidence had to be intentionally destroyed. This required strategic, large-scale erasure. Think about the massive, convenient city fires that occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Chicago, London, Boston, San Francisco. These were not random accidents. These were purges. They were designed to destroy unstable, ruined Tartarian structures that the inheritors couldn't maintain or explain, and, most importantly, to burn the accumulated historical records and university archives that contradicted the manufactured timeline. The official history was being aggressively sanitized. Furthermore, look at the world's fairs, the grand temporary cities built across the globe. These were massive construction projects built directly on top of recently excavated or repurposed Tartarian sites. They served two purposes. First, they presented the narrative that we are the great builders by showcasing technological progress, even though that technology was often crude mimicry. Second, once the fairs were over, the massive temporary structures were quickly dismantled, and the underlying foundation work, the inconvenient proofs of the buried civilization, were paved over, often with millions of tons of new dirt and concrete, erasing the evidence permanently. It was a controlled demolition of history, a physical and cultural reset engineered by the surviving global powers to ensure their total control over the narrative of human origins. We are not living at the peak of civilization. We are living among the ruins of a civilization far greater than ours. The bridges that defied gravity, the buildings that stand half-buried, the endless pattern of the mud flood. It is all proof that we were lied to. We are not the builders. We are the scattered survivors, occupying the derelict monuments of a forgotten empire. We have been taught to celebrate our crude, inefficient progress, while ignoring the monolithic evidence of the superior, advanced world that perished violently beneath our feet. The mystery of the bridges is the doorway to understanding the massive deception underpinning our entire historical identity. But the question remains, if a civilization possessed the technology to build bridges that could withstand Armageddon, what were they building them for? And what kind of force could possibly have destroyed them? The answers lie not just in architecture and engineering, but in the devastating, weaponized technology that we are told is just mythological fantasy. The bridges survived the disaster, but what about the energy source that powered the war that caused it? The deepest secrets of Tartaria are not structural, they are cataclysmic. And that, my friends, is where we must venture next. This is the final descent into the abyss of forgotten truth. We have analyzed the impossible structures, the bridges that should have disintegrated under the relentless siege of time, rust, and entropy, yet stand today, mocking the very foundation of modern engineering history. But the ultimate question remains, if these structures were so advanced, if the physics governing their construction were so superior, why did the civilization that built them vanish? Why are we, their supposed technological descendants, left scavenging the ruins? The lie is not just about the date these bridges were built. The lie is about the entire timeline of human achievement. We are told that the Industrial Revolution was a slow, grueling climb from steam to steel. Yet, across every continent, we find megalithic spans, perfect parabolic arches, and stress tolerances that require materials science only achieved in the late 20th century. Does this make any sense? How could men wielding hammers and basic surveying tools achieve structural perfection that modern architects, armed with supercomputers and quantum analysis, struggle to replicate without invoking colossal budgets and specialized alloys? We are staring directly into a technological paradox so vast it swallows the official narrative whole. Look closely at the surviving documentation, the frantic, often nonsensical attribution of these masterpieces to railroad barons or rudimentary state projects. They claim primitive labor moved monolithic keystones weighing hundreds of tons across vast canyons, using nothing more than oxen and rope. This is the equivalent of claiming ancient Egyptians built the pyramids using paper clips and determination. It is absurd. It is insulting. We must shift our perspective entirely. Maybe, just maybe, the official builders didn't build this. Maybe they merely inherited it. Maybe they were the desperate survivors, the ragged cleanup crew tasked with occupying the grand pre-existing infrastructure of a civilization they barely understood. We are not the pioneering generation. We are the occupants, living in the repurposed shell of a global network that was once seamless, interconnected, and technologically sublime. We are squatters in a global skyscraper we didn't construct, desperately trying to hide the fact that the basement levels are buried under 20 feet of hardened sediment. And this realization is where the bridges become crucial visual proof. Look beyond the visible roadway. Look at the massive, impossibly over-engineered piers that anchor these spans. Why are they so enormous? Why are their foundations sunk so deep that they often vanish below the current documented water level, extending into what appears to be solid, impenetrable earth? The answer is terrifyingly simple. Those piers were not designed for the current topographical context. They were designed to withstand a far greater, far more cataclysmic event, and they succeeded. Follow the line of those colossal bridge supports down below the mud line. What you find is the exact same pattern we see in the cities these bridges connected. Buried floors, oversized doors leading nowhere, windows starting below the current sidewalk level, and ventilation shafts disguised as purely ornamental reliefs. These bridges are the exterior extension of the same pattern of burial and rediscovery. They stand so high because the land beneath them rose violently, rapidly, universally. Why would anyone design a bridge pier that disappears 20 feet into the ground, unless the official story of gradual sediment accumulation is a deliberate, calculated lie? The structural resilience of these bridges is a testament to advanced lost technology. We are not talking about simple stone masonry. We are talking about materials synthesized using methods we have forgotten, perhaps resonant frequencies that bonded materials at a molecular level, or proprietary cements that cured instantly and hardened exponentially over centuries, rather than degrading. Imagine the scale. A unified civilization spanning the globe, capable of engineering structures to withstand cyclical planetary resets. This pattern is not isolated to a single region. This is a global pattern. We see the identical construction principles, the same impossible spans, the same disregard for modern logistical limitations, from the massive viaducts of the American West to the inexplicable stone bridges hidden in the deepest jungles of Southeast Asia, from the forgotten railway spans of Siberia to the megalithic crossings in South America. They all share the telltale signs of unified design, unified metallurgy, and unified mastery over forces that we, the occupants, are only beginning to rediscover. It cannot be coincidence. It is proof of a cohesive, global-level power grid, transportation network, and technological infrastructure that was violently and abruptly severed. This realization brings us to the moment of the catastrophe, the Great Reset. The bridges did not collapse, because they were designed to survive the very thing that destroyed the civilization around them. The evidence points inexorably to a sudden, violent event that was not a slow geological process, but a rapid, planet-wide disaster. Call it the mud flood, call it the ether event, call it the global deluge. The result was the same: the obliteration of the creators and the burial of their lowest, most advanced layers of civilization beneath massive liquefied earth deposits. Imagine the chaos. Empty cities, colossal structures standing silent above the newly hardened sludge. The survivors, few and scattered, were forced to dig themselves out, or simply build anew on top of the ruins, often using the superior materials they found scattered around them. This explains the impossible demographics of the mid-19th century, the vast tracts of land, particularly North America, filled with magnificent, fully realized cities like Chicago, San Francisco, and New York, yet somehow boasting populations too small and too resource-deprived to have built them. Where did everyone go? They were wiped out, and their vast infrastructure was repurposed by the new manufactured history. The bridges survived because they were masters of resonant technology. Perhaps they utilized principles of atmospheric electricity for structural reinforcement, maintaining a constant energetic field that stabilized the stone and metal. Perhaps they utilized ancient heating systems, integrated into the stonework, that kept the structures impervious to extreme freeze-thaw cycles. We look at a massive bridge arch and see only stone. They saw a resonant structure, a piece of sophisticated engineering that interacted dynamically with the planet's own energy grid. The new occupants, terrified and ignorant, simply treated them as durable, static objects, failing to comprehend the subtle, advanced physics embedded within every arch and truss. The subsequent destruction of evidence was not an accident of history. It was a methodical, organized campaign by the new custodians of power. How do you erase the memory of a civilization that built bridges that cannot collapse? You burn the blueprints. You destroy the libraries. You rewrite the encyclopedias. We see the patterns of massive, accidental urban fires across the world in the late 1800s. Chicago, London, Boston, San Francisco, Moscow, all conveniently wiping out the architectural archives and land ownership records right when the new narrative was being firmly established. The great world fairs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were not celebrations of new technology. They were often massive, temporary structures built quickly, cheaply, and ostentatiously on top of the recent ruins of Tartaria, designed to distract the populace and cement the manufactured timeline. The bridges are the final, unmovable monuments to the crime. They could not be burned down. They could not be easily demolished. And so, they were simply attributed to the earliest possible date and ignored, incorporated into the New World map as inconvenient anomalies, quaint old structures, built by forgotten engineers who somehow achieved feats that defied their purported technology. The ultimate conclusion is sobering, terrifying, and unavoidable. We are not the builders of this world. We are the inheritors of a cosmic junkyard. We are living among the magnificent ruins of a civilization far greater than ours, utilizing scraps of their technology, their bridges, their massive grid foundations, their strangely resilient architecture, without understanding the principles that sustained them. The bridges that should have collapsed but didn't prove the historical timeline we were fed is a fabrication, a deliberate simplification designed to keep us compliant, ignorant of the cyclical nature of planetary destruction and renewal. We are not at the apex of history. We are merely the survivors standing on the rubble pile, repeating the tired stories given to us by the victors of the last catastrophe. But the structures remain. They whisper the truth in every perfectly cut stone and every impossibly engineered arch. They stand as immutable proof that the clock has been reset before, violently and totally. And if it happened once, based on the sheer resilience required to engineer these structures, it will happen again. Look around you. Study the bridges, the viaducts, the stone archways that defy decay. They are the keys to unlocking the true, terrifying history of our world. The lie is global, the cover-up is absolute, and the knowledge of advanced power, of true science, is the ultimate suppressed secret. The question now is not how they built them, but why they had to design them to survive a global cataclysm. And what is coming next? That is the real truth they desperately try to keep buried.